Imagine a lock that has been jammed shut for decades. And, behind that door, a disease claims roughly 90% of its victims within 5 years.
Yeah, it's a grim reality. I mean, for a long time, the medical community's only real option was to just repeatedly try to kick that door down with brute force.
Exactly. But today, we're looking at a corporate blueprint that claims to have finally, cut the key. We're looking at this incredibly dense stack of documents. Specifically, we're diving into the Q1 2026 earnings press release and the accompanying presentation deck from Incyte.
Dated April 28th, 2026, right?
Right, April 28th.
And it is a massive data drop. I mean, we're talking spreadsheets, clinical trial readouts, strategic forecasts, all of it.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot for anyone to sift through.
It is. But when you look past the raw numbers, you realize this isn't just about corporate accounting. If you want to understand where medicine is heading over the next decade, you cannot just read academic papers.
You have to look at the money.
Precisely. You have to look at where the largest biopharma companies are placing their billion-dollar bets today. The capital allocation, it basically tells the story of the science.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we aren't just going to read you a spreadsheet today. Our mission for this deep dive is to decode the anatomy of a modern biopharma company.
Yeah, to really see how it ticks.
Right. We're going to look at how a firm like Incyte balances the reliable cash cows that keep the lights on with the incredibly high-stakes, bleeding-edge science required to cure diseases we currently think of as untouchable.
And that tension, that exact tension between generating steady revenue and funding high-risk research, that is the defining characteristic of this entire industry.
Because you can't have one without the other, right?
Exactly. You cannot fund the breakthroughs without a phenomenal financial engine already in place. It's just too expensive.
Right. So let's start by looking under the hood of that engine. Because based on this Q1 report, the engine is pulling some serious weight.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah, so Incyte posted $1.10 billion in Q1 net sales. And that represents a 20% year-over-year growth.
Which is substantial.
Huge. And at the center of that is their foundational drug, Jakafi, which brought in $758 million for the quarter, which is up 7% from the previous year.
Right, and Jakafi is, it's a textbook anchor product. A 7% growth on a mature asset that's already generating $750 million in a single quarter.
It's just wild.
It is. It provides immense operational stability. But, the real narrative in these documents isn't actually Jakafi.
No.
No, it's what they're building around it.
Yeah, that is what jumped out at me too. Because they have this category they call the core business ex Jakafi, meaning, literally everything else they sell.
Right.
That segment grew by 63% to $347 million.
Which is a staggering jump.
It really is. And if you zoom in even further, their hematology and oncology portfolio grew by 116% to $204 million.
Yeah, 116%. That's not just incremental growth.
No, we are talking about newer launches with names like Niktimvo, Monjuvi, and Zynyz. And Zynyz, by the way, just secured European Commission approval for squamous cell carcinoma of the anal canal.
Right, and that European approval for Zynyz is a critical expansion of their geographical footprint. But look at the broader shift happening here. 116% growth rate in that newer oncology sector. That changes the calculus for the entire company.
Totally. I was trying to visualize this dynamic for you, the listener, while I was reading this. It feels a bit like a space launch.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, so Jakafi is that massive first-stage rocket booster. It is doing the heavy, sustained lifting to get the company into orbit. But these newer hematology and oncology drugs, the ones growing at 116%, they're like these hyper-fast satellites finally being deployed.
It is a vivid image, for sure. But we need to carry that analogy to its logical and sometimes, dangerous conclusion.
Wait, dangerous?
Yeah, because rocket boosters eventually run out of fuel and detach. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the reality of the patent cliff.
The patent cliff.
Right. In the pharmaceutical industry, that period of exclusivity where no one else can manufacture your drug, it eventually expires.
Right, and then the generic competitors just flood in.
Exactly. And the revenue from that specific drug just evaporates overnight.
Wow.
So if those hyperfast satellites aren't fully operational and generating their own sustainable revenue by the time Jakafi's patents expire, the whole company falls back to earth.
So that's why analysts care so much about the rest of the portfolio.
That is exactly why analysts scrutinize that 63% non-Jakafi growth rate so closely. Incyte is actively proving they're not a one-trick pony.
Right.
They are successfully building a diversified multi-drug revenue ecosystem, which, frankly, is the only way to survive the inevitable expiration of your flagship product's exclusivity.
Okay, that makes total sense. So they are generating massive capital, but that cash isn't just sitting in a corporate treasury account somewhere. It is being
Oh,
weaponized.
absolutely.
It is being poured directly into research and development. And this deck shows they have 10 phase 3 trials underway right now.
10 of them. That's massive.
10. And phase 3 is the final, most expensive hurdle before a company asks the FDA for approval.
Right, it's the make or break moment.
Exactly. And looking through this pipeline, one program immediately demands attention. It's called INCB 16164, or just 734 for short. And it targets something called the KRAS G12D mutation.
Yeah, and let me just say, the KRAS programs are some of the most closely watched initiatives in all of oncology right now.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Incyte just initiated a phase 3 study, DAW-N303, looking at 734 as a first-line treatment for metastatic pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, or PDAC.
And to give you some context on why this matters, the presentation notes that the G12D mutation drives 40% of all PDAC cases.
Which is a huge chunk.
And pancreatic cancer, it has a devastating 5-year survival rate of less than 10%.
It's one of the toughest diagnoses out there.
Yeah, and as of right now, according to the deck, there are 0 targeted therapies approved for this specific mutation.
0. It is a profound unmet medical need. But to understand why there are no targeted therapies, you really have to understand the physical biology of KRAS.
Okay. Break that down for me.
Well, for decades, researchers informally referred to the KRAS protein as the Death Star.
Wait, what? The Death Star? Why?
Great. Because of its physical shape. Look, most proteins that cause cancer have these little grooves or pockets on their surface.
Like keyhole.
Exactly like keyholes. Drug developers design molecules to perfectly slot into those pockets and just shut the protein down.
Makes sense.
But the surface of the KRAS protein is incredibly smooth. There was also nowhere for a drug molecule to latch onto. It was considered undruggable for over 30 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. What you're saying is that for decades, scientists knew exactly what was causing the cancer to grow, this G12D mutation, but they physically couldn't get a grip on it?
Literally could not get a grip on it, yes.
So if standard chemotherapy is like trying to kick the door down, this targeted therapy, 734, is the result of finally finding like a microscopic scratch on the Death Star's surface to exploit. They finally cut the key to the lock.
That is the biological triumph here, yes. The drug is designed to find that minuscule foothold and specifically inhibit the mutated G12D protein.
Which is doing what, exactly?
Well, the mutation is essentially a switch stuck in the on position, constantly telling the pancreatic cells to divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And 734 flips it off.
That is incredible. But wait, I have to admit, I am a little confused by the clinical trial design here.
Okay, what part?
I'm looking at Dawn 303. They are testing this incredibly elegant new key, 734, in combination with standard chemotherapy. The deck lists M-alpharinocox or Gemnab.
Right, standard regimens.
But if they have finally built this highly precise weapon, why are they still combining it with the blunt force of chemotherapy? Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose?
That is a fundamental question about modern oncology, honestly. To answer it, we have to translate what those acronyms actually mean.
Okay, let's do it.
Drugs like M-fulfirinox are not just single therapies. They are incredibly heavy-duty, multi-drug chemotherapy cocktails.
Like very harsh on the body?
Notoriously brutal on the human body, yes. But they're used because pancreatic cancer is not just a locked door. It is a fortified bunker.
Explain the bunker. What makes pancreatic cancer so uniquely defensive?
Well, pancreatic tumors develop this dense physical tissue around themselves called the stroma.
The stroma.
Okay. It acts like a concrete wall that literally blocks drugs from getting inside. And on top of that, the tumor actively suppresses the patient's immune system in that microenvironment.
So it's hiding and defending itself.
Exactly. So if you only use the precision key, the targeted 734 drug, the cancer is complex enough that it will often mutate around it or find a secondary biological pathway to keep growing.
So you have to hit it from multiple angles at the exact same time.
You have to. You disrupt its primary genetic driver, the G12D mutation, with the targeted therapy. You strip away its main engine. And while the tumor is structurally weakened and unable to signal for growth properly, you overwhelm the bunker with systemic chemotherapy to clear it out.
That is a wild strategy. But combining a brand new experimental drug with a brutal chemo cocktail, That sounds incredibly toxic for the patient.
It is a massive concern, which is why one specific phrase in this presentation is so critical. Manageable tolerability profile.
Manageable tolerability profile, meaning patients can handle it.
Yes. Incyte's early data suggests they can combine 734 with these heavy chemotherapy regimens without having to lower the dose of the chemotherapy.
Oh, I
And
see.
that is a massive hurdle clear. You do not want to compromise your dose intensity. You need the full force of the chemo alongside the precision of the targeted inhibitor to breach that bunker.
Okay, that completely shifts my perspective on this. We just talked about using pinpoint precision to stop cancer cells from multiplying. But what happens when you need to use that same precision to tell the body's own immune system to, stand down?
That's the other side of the coin.
Right. This brings us to the other major pillar of Incyte's pipeline, their inflammation and autoimmunity portfolio, or IAI.
Yes. And while oncology is often a battle for the length of life, their work in immunology is a battle for the quality of life.
That's a good way to put it.
And the data emerging from their late-stage pipeline in this area is really demanding attention.
Let's talk about povorcitinib, because it is an oral JAK1 inhibitor, and the phase 3 numbers in this deck are just fascinating.
They ran 2 trials, right?
Yeah, SOPV1 and SAPIV2, looking at non-segmental vitiligo. And at 52 weeks, 18.9% of patients taking povorcitinib achieved a greater than 75% reduction in facial vitiligo.
Wow.
Yeah. And by comparison, the placebo groups were sitting way down between 3.1 and 6.8%.
Vitiligo has historically had very few systemic treatment options. So clearing that 75% threshold for nearly a fifth of patients at a year is a highly significant clinical benchmark.
It's massive. And it isn't just vitiligo. The FDA just accepted their new drug application for a condition called hidradenitis suppurativa, or HS.
HS.
Now, for those who don't know, HS is a severely painful chronic skin condition. It causes these deep inflammatory nodules and draining tunnels under the skin.
It is incredibly debilitating.
It is. And in their 54-week data, up to 71% of patients achieved a clinical response called a HiSCR50.
Let's translate that metric because it sounds super clinical, but it represents a profound shift for the patient.
Yeah, what does HiSCR50 actually mean?
It essentially means the patient experienced at least a 50% reduction in the total number of those painful inflammatory lesions without any new abscesses or draining tunnels forming.
Wow.
Right. It is a very strict metric for measuring real-world relief.
That's life-changing. And we should also mention their topical cream, Opzelura, which is doing incredibly well, too.
Right. The topical ruxolitinib.
Yeah. Revenues for the quarter for that were up 20% to $143 million. And they are expecting a European regulatory decision later in 2026 for moderate atopic dermatitis.
That whole dermatology portfolio is just expanding rapidly.
It really is. But I want to focus back on that oral pill, povorcitinib, because, we all know someone dealing with chronic skin issues, and the psychological toll is immense. But I get that vitiligo and HS are both dermatological conditions.
Yeah.
But one is a visible, generally painless loss of pigment, and the other is a hidden, excruciatingly painful disease of deep nodules. Biologically, how on earth is the exact same pill treating both?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It doesn't make sense to me. Are these drugs just suppressing symptoms across the board, or is there a deeper connection? What does this all mean?
Well, this raises an important question about what a J inhibitor actually does at the cellular level, because you're right to be confused.
Thank you.
On the surface, vitiligo and HS look entirely unrelated, but we have to look past the symptoms and examine the biological communication network.
Okay, the communication network.
Right. Povorcitinib is not a cosmetic cover-up for vitiligo, and it is not an analgesic painkiller for HS. It operates much, much deeper.
So tell me about this network. What is a J8 inhibitor?
Okay, so JK stands for Janus kinase. Think of Janus kinases as the internal communication hubs inside our immune cells.
Like a switchboard.
Exactly like a switchboard. When your immune system detects a threat, say a virus, it releases chemical messengers called cytokines.
Cytokines, okay.
These cytokines float through the body, find an immune cell, and bind to a receptor on the outside of that cell. But that receptor needs a way to pass the message all the way down into the cell's nucleus to actually trigger a reaction.
Oh, so the JK enzymes are the messengers carrying the alert into the headquarters.
Yes. They are the crucial relay in an immunological game of telephone.
I love that.
The cytokine hits the receptor activates the JAK enzymes, and the JAK enzymes tell the nucleus we are under attack, start an inflammatory response.
Got it.
But in autoimmune diseases, that signaling pathway is fundamentally broken. The immune system is constantly screaming danger, and the Jake enzymes are dutifully passing that message along, commanding the body to attack itself, even when there is no infection.
Oh, wow. And that runaway inflammation manifests differently depending on where the biological misfire is concentrated.
Precisely. In vitiligo, that specific overactive JAK signaling causes the immune system to hunt down and destroy melanocytes, which are the cells that produce skin pigment.
Okay. And in HS.
In hidradenitis suppurativa, that runaway signaling concentrates in the hair follicles and sweat glands, and that causes massive structural inflammation that results in those deep, painful abscesses.
So when a patient takes
Povorcitinib specifically targets and blocks JAK1. It essentially intercepts the messenger.
so the message never reaches the nucleus.
Exactly. Even though the immune system is still screaming danger, the JAK1 enzyme is blocked from passing that message in. The inflammatory response is never triggered.
It is actually rewiring the broken communication.
Yes.
It turns the volume down on the specific pathway causing the destruction, which is why one single pill can treat two radically different physical manifestations of the exact same underlying communication error. That is just incredible.
It really is. It is the defining shift in modern immunology. We are moving away from broad immunosuppressants that just shut down the entire immune system and moving toward these highly specific molecular interceptors.
Well, looking at the time, we need to wrap up this deep dive, but what a massive scope we've covered today.
We really went from financials to cellular biology.
We did. We started by looking at the financial realities of biotech. Analyzing a $1.1 billion quarter anchored by the steady force of Jakafi, and understanding why a 63% growth rate in a diversified portfolio is the only way to survive the patent cliff.
The rocket booster has to drop off eventually.
Right. And then we ventured into the frontier of the undruggable, exploring how Incyte is funding an aggressive, multi-pronged assault on the KRAS G12D Death Star mutation in pancreatic cancer.
The bunker strategy.
The bunker strategy, exactly. And finally, we unpacked the deep cellular biology of Janus kinase, seeing how a single targeted molecule can restore the quality of life for people suffering from entirely different autoimmune diseases.
And, if you are an investor parsing the 2026 guidance, or a researcher looking at trial design, or just someone curious about science, the ultimate takeaway from these documents is the same.
It is.
The future of biotechnology demands fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. A company needs the financial architecture to survive its own success, and the scientific audacity to tackle both the length of a patient's life and the quality of it.
It is a delicate, high-stakes balancing act. And, it leaves me with one final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
We are clearly entering an era of hyper-targeted medicine. We are looking at a fast-approaching reality where a pill is designed for the exact specific genetic mutation of your tumor or the deeply isolated immune pathway causing your skin condition.
Yeah, it's getting very specific.
Right, and it makes you wonder, are the days of the universal blockbuster drug, the single pill that treats millions of people the exact same way, are those days finally behind us? And as medicine gets increasingly personalized, fragmenting into smaller and smaller genetic subgroups, well, what happens to the diseases and the patients that just don't quite fit into these neat, perfectly targeted genetic boxes?
That is the profound challenge the entire medical community will have to answer next.
Something to think about. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.